Okay, so let's take another look at Ukraine and what's likely to happen next. And we're going to base our appraisal of this on the capabilities that we've seen the various armies display. So we're going to start off with Russia, who, of course, built up some huge amount of troops along the border and along here. And within a few days, they attacked towards Kyiv and they attacked this way, and they attacked towards Kharkiv and made some progress. And in the end, they made it all the way up to about here, and actually took Kherson. Right, so that was what they got early on in the war. However, during this, we learned that they basically lacked the ability for all arms warfare, which is basically fighting war on the cheap. You have to defeat your enemy before they can launch a coordinated military response. So it's basically you have to build up your troops in secret, which the Russians didn't manage to do. They knew there was whatever it was, 250,000 Russians doing a military exercise on the border. And then the strategic surprise, not really. And not only that, it was roundly defeated here. All of this was pushed out. All of this was pushed out. And all of this was eventually pushed out. So what we got from this is Russia just doesn't have the ability to mass troops in secret and launch coordinated attacks. As was demonstrated, Bakhmut is about here somewhere. There was some grinding attritional war that went on for about a year, in which the Russians made almost no progress and eventually captured Bakhmut, or mostly captured it, about there, which has all sorts of echoes of Stalingrad about it. Okay, so let's get rid of some of this. And in fact, let's get rid of all of it. There we go. So, what? Right, hopefully now we have our pen back. Do we have our pen back? Yes, good. Super. So the thing was that it took the Russians months to, 6 months to basically capture some tiny little tract of almost worthless land here. It really had this sort of Pyrrhic Stalingrad feel to it, that it was some huge push to capture something that really didn't make any difference. But that was a year of maximum effort by the Russians. Now, there's all sorts of attritional warfare going on elsewhere while this is happening. But in the meantime, what did we get from the Ukrainians? They managed to display that, first of all, they were capable of pushing back the Russians here, and they were capable of pushing them back here. And in what was the nearest sort of semblance of all arms war, they managed to basically, in a very rapid succession, push the established Russian lines all the way from Kharkiv in roughly this section. So at the moment, the front line looks something like this. It's all the way down here. We've got Bakhmut, and then it's basically across the river and all the way down here. That's roughly what we're looking at the moment. So this bit here is significant because this is the only time that either of these sides has displayed the ability for sort of rapid advance. And even at that, it's arguable whether this was basically the Russian lines collapsing or whether this was a coordinated attack by the Ukrainians. So here we are, basically a year on. And the Russian position is actually remarkably vulnerable by dint of the fact that this is a thin strip of land that can only be supplied by here, which has to go, of course, through the Kursk Peninsula, or the Kursk Bridge, which is been shown to be vulnerable and was destroyed for a bit. I don't know what sort of flow of supplies they've got going through there at the moment. Or you have to supply it down here. So, this is basically a strategic nightmare to defend. The Russians would in many ways be better off just sort of pulling back to here, but they wanted their land bridge down to the Crimea. So, okay. But this means that there aren't actually, this is big open farmlands. It is a sort of nightmare to try and defend it. The only thing that sort of works in your favor here is also quite hard to sort of sneakily build up loads of tanks and that sort of thing. Now, the golden rule is that if you're ever going to get into an attritional warfare, rule number one is fight your wars on the cheap. Try and win quickly and with minimal resources. Russia just absolutely failed to do this against a numerically inferior foe that was much more poorly supplied than it was. Although, this has clearly showed that the Russian military is not the formidable force that everyone thought it was. The mere fact they spent a year trying to capture some tiny scrap of land, and this is where current affairs have taken over. There's been this little Russian or sort of home Russian partisan sort of attack of. There have been a few tanks that have crossed the border, and it's kind of embarrassing for Russia that someone could just do this. Don't you have a giant military that's meant to stop this sort of thing? What it most interestingly shows to me is that there is a huge amount of porosity on large portions of the sort of front line, as it were. And if I'm a guessing man, what this is, the design of this, we're in inspired guesswork territory here, but it's just to double the strength on a line that is this long takes a huge amount of troops and resources, and there's only a limited number of places you can pull those from. So it's basically by forcing the enemy to defend an extended border, even if these are only done by these sort of tiny little, PR tanks driving around in Russia type things, you've got two options. You put up with that as a sort of PR humiliation, or you try and defend it. And on the battlefield, there's nowhere else for those troops to come from but here. If you're looking at what can Ukraine do, basically anything where you get an intervention like this would be fantastic. Is that within the Ukrainian capabilities? We've not really seen them achieve anything like this. So what happened was the only bit that was a rapid advance was this attack here, which was, I don't know, full last year or something. And it's not clear whether that was just the Russian line was so thinly manned that it basically just fell apart. Other than that, we had a grinding attritional war towards Kherson, which took months, and eventually the Russians just withdrew. Whatever forces they had. But Russia's problem is that they are now engaged with an enemy and who is better supplied militarily than they are or ever likely going to be. They're stuck in a grinding attritional war where the industrial might of the people they're fighting against is greater than theirs. And the expectation is you just grind down what's on the front line, and then if you can mass up some tanks, you just drive your tanks, to the sea. You cut off all of this, and whatever's left in this region here, there's nothing here, by the way. It's just empty farmlands. They basically have to retreat. So this is, if I had to guess where it's going to go, it'll be along those lines. That there'll be a push towards basically seizing the supply route that goes through this strip of land, and that'll kind of be that. So yeah, how this goes. I mean, last year when Ukraine this is the thing. Once you lose the ability to man the front line, the war is basically lost. And I did have suspicions last year that when the Ukrainians just drove into this area of land, that they, well, what's to stop them? There's only like a couple of roads and a few relatively minor cities in this. It's a pretty empty land, this area. So, maybe they would just move on. That didn't happen in the end. So, but yeah, looking at what Ukraine can sensibly do, this is it. You get in there, you cut off the troops sort of south of you, where the only place that they can escape is through this pinch point here. I mean, this would be the ideal, is you actually capture that pinch point such that the troops can't retreat, and you cut off their retreat this way as well. And in that way, you sort of neutralize all of this portion of the Russians defending the line. And after that, you've got all of your troops freed up that were also defending this. Those then come over to the remaining front line, and you have numerical superiority. But the thing is that Ukraine has never really demonstrated an ability to launch a coordinated surprise attack like this. It's not something that they've demonstrated yet. And if they just sat into a grinding attritional war, then this just grinds on for years until someone runs out of stuff. Anyway, so that's where I think this is going to go. Hope you enjoyed it. If so, maybe drop a thumbs up on it, and I will see you next time.